So there's a lot of information and videos, and it's written about extensively in books on trauma, the window of tolerance. And that is usually represented as kind of two parallel lines or like a box. And inside that box or inside the two parallel lines is what we call the window of tolerance. And outside of the box or the two lines is what we call being outside of our window of tolerance. And I like to think of that as a sphere instead. The concept of a box or these two parallel lines implies that there is this scaling, and that inside that window of tolerance, when you get too high, then you go outside. So the visualization that works better for me is this sphere concept. So inside the sphere is your window of tolerance. And when your emotions and thoughts get so upsetting to you that it pushes you outside that window of tolerance, it can be anywhere, it's just outside of that sphere. And when you're outside of that sphere of tolerance, that window of tolerance, then you are going to have either hyper arousal or hypo arousal. And hyperarousal is pretty easy to spot and see in somebody. You're more activated, more agitated, your breathing may shorten and quicken. You may feel more hypervigilant, more fidgety, and it's easy to see that in someone because they're like this, and it's very hard sometimes to see hypoarousal because it oftentimes just like someone's becoming kind of quiet and thoughtful, but what's happening inside is maybe some blankness or numbness, dissociation, just kind of checking out of yourself, daydreaming, feeling lethargic or sleepy or lacking awareness, everything seeming fuzzy. And those two hypo and hyper arousal responses are a normal human response to getting outside of that window of tolerance. Now, something that can play into what pushes you outside of that window of tolerance is ongoing stress or current stressors in life. So this sphere that I see as the window of tolerance can shrink and grow. It is not static. So when life is going along quite smoothly and there's very little stress and things are kind of, moving towards like optimal or ideal kind of experiences in life, then that sphere of tolerance may be very big. You may be able to take lots of things in a given moment and not push outside your window of tolerance because there's more room. And so when you have lots of stressors going on, let's say you have, family conflict, maybe an ailing parent, maybe there's difficulties in your friendships, maybe work is not going well, maybe there's uncertain traits or circumstances in your future. Keep on going. So if there's lots of things, it's like the stress pushes in and shrinks that window of tolerance. And so then in any given moment, such as a triggering event, you have this little tiny space to tolerate. And so if it's a big triggering event, very quickly it can push you outside of your sphere of tolerance. And so on a time of life that's full of stressors, especially if they're ongoing, that window of tolerance being smaller means you have very little space to take on a triggering event, and you're going to go into hypo or hypoarousal much more quickly, much more easily, and probably with a greater degree of hypo or hypoarousal and a lesser degree of kind of self-awareness and self-resourcing, because you're kind of spent. Your internal resources are spent from carrying such a high degree of stress over a period of time. And so there's my little perspective on window of tolerance. And I hope that helps you understand why sometimes you may feel like you can handle things well, and other times you're like, I fucking suck. I can't get life together. I can't handle the hard things going on. And that also is a normal human response to things a human should not have to experience.